So I first read Mistborn Era 1 and then The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance in 2014. And I was pretty obsessed at the time. I think there was like an entire month where I would just like read part 5 of Words of Radiance like most nights before I went to sleep. Um, and who would be what flashback was known at the time. And I was like, ooh, Zeth flashbacks. I want those. So this is a book I've been excited for 10 years. Which there have been people who've waited longer for books than that, for sure. But in my young life, this is the longest I've ever been excited about for a book. It's not the longest I've ever had to directly wait between books, like, after the current release. But, like, when I read Words of Radiance and I looked at the flashbacks, this was the one I was specifically excited for. So, in a way, I've waited, like, 10 years for it. And, I'll just start off, I thought it was storming awesome. I really enjoyed it. I do also think it probably has more individual scenes that I consider weaker than the other 4 Stormlight books. I just think it also has the most completely spectacular one. I think of the Stormlight books, it's the biggest display of both Sanderson's strengths and his weaknesses. And I feel like I'm going to get some of the weaknesses out of the way first, because I have some not major criticisms. Like, for most books, it would just be like, whatever. But for me, the expectations for me is set so high for a Stormlight novel, the end of an arc, and Zeth flashbacks, that I'm holding this novel to a very high standard. And fortunately for one of them, we are confirmed not crazy. So the first thing that people have talked about is it feels like there is a moderate decline in writing from the previous Stormlight novels. And I reread Rhythm of War. I wonder if you guys are going to be able to hear my cat eating in the background. We'll find out later. I reread Rhythm of War after reading the pre-release chapters. And so I was like, yeah, like there is a noticeable difference. And like Sanderson had a comment on it recently. And he basically described it better than I could, which he said, for those who don't know, that said, we did lose Moshe as an editor, largely, and he was excellent at line editing in particular. I see a complaint about Wind and Truth having more than average show then tell moments, which is my term for when you repeat the idea too many times, not for reinforcement, but you're to write your way into a concept, and do it weekly as you're discovering it. So your subconscious has to do it again a few paragraphs or pages later and do it well, then you forget to cut the first one. And this is something I'll have to look at. Plus, I feel that we have been rushed as a team ever since the Gathering Storm. That's a long time to be in semi-crisis mode and getting books ready for the last few months before publication. We largely, as a company, do blah, 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 blah. And yeah, that pretty accurately describes the difference I was seeing. Now, I had a suspicion that it came from a different source. I thought it might have come from the promise, like the good desire to represent people very accurately. I know a lot of time, like when he's trying to represent people who have had certain lived experience, he will ask them, and I feel like gets feedback. And it felt like sometimes, like to me, what it felt like is that some of the stuff he'd gotten was being more directly put into the novels compared to being like interpreted and translated through the lens of the specific characters, which I felt he did a very good job of throughout the first, like the earlier Stormlight novels. I'm glad that he has seen the feedback. And something that was really interesting, so I was at Dragonsteel, and for the big like book reveal thing, the person I was sitting next to a guy named Billy, who's in this book. He gets referenced as the Skybreaker Belit. I sat next to him, and he was a beta reader, and we talked about the process, and I asked him, like, how often does it happen where by the end of the beta reading process, like, there will be beta readers who are just like, yeah, I don't, their final feedback, like, they get asked, like, what is your overall impression of the novel? How often is the overall impression from a beta reader, like, I don't like the novel? And he said, all the time. And I've found that promising. And I'm also, from the comment, like, that I was reading from, it did say at the end, like, that he can't, like, discount these comments, and he has to, like, look into it. And I hope he does take that seriously because it is a little bit immersion breaking because it's just clunkier. And, it probably brought my rating down in the book down a little bit. Well, probably down more than you'd see because it had so much insane crap. Like, if that wasn't an issue in Wind and Truth, it would be my favorite Stormlight novel, I think. And I'll say it isn't my favorite Stormlight novel. It's possible on reread it could be because it does so much well. I love the novel. I know I'm getting criticisms out of the way first, but this is like, this held it back from being my favorite. I also do think I might be starting to see a hint of something that is just not as much of a strength as Sanderson as it is for some other people who write really long series. And like if we think of other long series that have like really long character arcs, like Harry Dresden, Fitz, like Robert Jordan and The Wheel of Time, those three writers specifically are really good at like multi-book character arcs that constantly feel dynamic and like basically having like these separate character arcs that don't feel disconnected, where like someone will go through development and like by the time you get years into their story, or I mean Wheel of Time doesn't take place over that many years, but a lot of like events for the main characters, like their conflict and what they're dealing with feels very separate than what they were dealing with at the beginning. But when you track it down, it's not like it was jumping around. And I think one thing that Wind and Truth had is a lot of the strongest stuff in this book, I think, is from characters who were not super prevalent in the early books. Like most characters, if I think about it, like a lot of their strongest moments come in the first two books where they become really prevalent. Now, there are some exceptions, like Dalinar's strongest book is Oathbringer. Pretty clearly. But that's kind of the exception because, like, it has its flashbacks and there's so clearly so much new stuff to go through. For me, the two strongest characters in this book are Szeth and Adolin. And, like, Kaladin is really good in this book. Like, I really enjoy his stuff, but I do think, like 5 books into Kaladin's arc, it feels more like a continuation and like a limping along of the same arc than like really new stuff going on in a dynamic way. And I wonder if it's just not maybe this is one reason he split it 5 and 5. Maybe it's just not like Sanderson's just not going to have a 10-book character arc for the same character and have it be compelling the entire time. And I imagine, the people who were main characters in the first half and lived are going to play a much smaller role in the second half. And that might be partially to cover a relative weakness of Sanderson compared to like Robert Jordan, Robin Hobb, Jim Butcher, who are very good at like these 10-book long characters. Yeah, that's kind of that. I wanted to get kind of the criticism stuff out of the way so then I could just unabashedly talk about how awesome I think the rest is. This is definitely like, after I read this, I was like, this is like, I could not have a criticism section this long for the other Stormlight novels. Like, I have the most criticisms for this, but I think like it's harder to talk about the positive stuff. Like, this is one thing that makes reviews hard. Explaining why something is bad, well, not bad, but explaining criticisms is usually easier to do in a spoiler-free fashion. And it's usually easier to do generally than explaining why something is good. Like, it's usually, because you don't have to, it's easier to just be like, this deviated from good for this reason than to explain what made it good in the first place. But, that's outside the scope of this review. So now, let's talk about how that Wind and Truth is completely fucking crazy. So Sanderson, the first 4 Stormlight novels are, in terms of structure, pretty similar. Like, they're all 5 parts, and they're all distinctly structured as if they're a trilogy. Hi, cat. Meow. Yes. I know. I'm talking to the camera and not you, and I should feel bad about that. She's getting a little round. You're getting a little heavier there. I shall not talk about... She's doing fine. What's up, everyone? Okay. You just wanted to meow at me, and now you want to go. That's cool. Like they're all plotted like a trilogy. There's a distinct like one large rising action, climax, falling action, but then like two other sub rising action, climax, falling actions. And this is not structured like that. This is more like the first fifth rising action, and then like for the next 80% is just like insanity and craziness, full blast, pedal to the metal, guitar solo mode. And like it works. So a lot of people called Rhythm of War a setup book. And I didn't agree. I thought Rhythm of War had a ton of completely insane stuff. And I was like Crossroads of Twilight is a setup book. Like, these are not the same thing. After reading Wind and Truth, I'm like, was Rhythm of War a setup book? Because everyone was left in a position for insanely interesting and compelling crap to happen to them. And they all... Like, I can say, not speaking to the book as a whole, because you can have... Although I also think the book as a whole was amazing. Whether the ending was good and whether the book was good are kind of like two separate things. Like, I have read final books in series before where I was like lukewarm on the book, but thought the ending beat was excellent. And I just want to say, like, the ending beat was incredible. Like, especially for balancing out it being an intermediate end, I thought every single character was left off in an incredibly narratively satisfying way. It left me so much questions. It gave me resolution at the same time. Incredible way of wrapping it all up. It's his first real pre-planned Cosmere ending since Mistborn Era 1. Because Mistborn Era 2 was an ending, but Mistborn Era 2 kind of got thrown together as he wrote it, because it was originally just supposed to be a novella, and then it turned into a quartet. This was his first, like, big pre... Since literally Mistborn Era 1. That's his only other one. And, like, the ending of Mistborn Era 1 is amazing. And I'd started to be like, you know, is he actually amazing at endings? Because some of his other endings, I would say, are, like, not as amazing. What's up, Reckoner's Trilogy? And I liked the ending of Mistborn Era 2, but it wasn't Mistborn Era 1's ending. This was insane. This was amazing, and just as an ending beat, left me with... I have essentially no criticisms of how the book resolved. There's not a single character where I'm like, you know, I don't really like where they ended up. This left me more excited for every single character who gets a flashback perspective in the back half than I was before. And some of them I was already pretty bloody excited for. This is going to be shocking. So I wasn't a Lift hater, but I was a Lift I'm moderately annoyed-er. Like, my position before was that I think Lift is not a one-dimensional character and is a character that clearly I think is going to have some depth, but whose voice is annoying. And I just don't find as entertaining as Sanderson does by a large margin, because I just didn't find her, like, actual voice or personality particularly entertaining at all. And I wasn't super, like, harsh on Lift, because some people love Lift, like people going around Dragonsteel dressed as pancakes. And I didn't think it was a badly done execution of the character he was going for, but I didn't like the character he was going for. There's not a lot of Lift in Wind and Truth. I really like Lift in Wind and Truth. Like every time we got a Lift perspective, I'd get to the end of that, and I'd be like, damn, that was awesome. To use the word awesome. That was not deliberate. Which is insane to me. I'm like, what black magic is this, Sanderson? Like, this doesn't make sense. So yeah, this has left me excited for every single flashback perspective. Yasna's in the most interesting place she's ever been as a character, like, by far. Anyway, I also think this might be the best paced Stormlight novel. I do think day one is pretty slow. Like, for day one, I was like, man, I really like a lot of these scenes. But some of the chapters are just like, not super impactful. And in hindsight, it's like, oh, that would be why. We're going to need some of the quieter moments. And I think this novel, like, reading it is such a reminder of Sanderson's overwhelming strengths as a writer that I think sometimes when you don't read it, or when I don't read him for a while, I start to forget about. Like, the man is just extremely good at emotionally compelling payoff. Like, he's just really good at that. Like, he sets it up maybe better than anyone else, and he just pays stuff off extremely well. And not just, like, quick together. It's not that, like, he saves it. It's like, he's just really good at understanding what will be narratively satisfying. And understanding what works and what will be emotionally compelling. In a way that's just, I think, built different from a lot of different authors. Because sometimes, like, when I don't read Sanderson for a while, like, if I go through attribute by attribute, and let's say I compare him to, like, Jim Butcher. I love both those authors. In my head, I'm usually like, yeah, I mean, I think Sanderson's my third favorite writer, and Jim Butcher's probably my fourth favorite writer. But then I go attribute by attribute, and I'm kind of like, what is Sanderson better at, other than just, like, not writing weird stuff that you're just kind of like, why did you put that in? Which, like, okay, yeah, Jim could do slightly less, but, like, it doesn't move the needle that much. Like, most of it is completely awesome. And I don't like, this isn't me trying to put Jim down. Anyone who knows me knows, like, go Dresden Files. But I do just think, then when I read him, I'm just reminded of, like, there's scenes that he just does really well. And he organizes them in a way that they all come together in a way that is so narratively satisfying. In fairness, Jim is also very good at this. But I feel that his stories are greater than the sum of their parts. And that, in terms of, like, if you go, like, okay, how good is he at character writing? How good is he at world building? Also, I just want to say the world building is insane. Like, world building for Stormlight is one of the things that has not stagnated. Where I feel like if we were to compare, like, how my opinion of the characters has evolved. So, like, Kaladin was one of my favorite characters ever 2 books in. And I feel my opinion as Kaladin was like, whoop, and then pretty much leveled off. And maybe, like, I'm ever so slightly low, but he's still one of my favorite protagonists ever. If you compare that with, like, I'm going to bring up the same 3 people I did before. Like, Harry Dresden, Fitz, or Rand. Like, I just like them more and more as I read more of them. Stormlight world building has gotten that exponential, like, the continued growth of, like, book 1, the world building is insane. Book 2, whoa, it's even better. And it just keeps getting even better. And I've never had a higher opinion of it than I do right now. Man, this is a rambly review. Okay, one thing I want to talk about is Cosmere connections. I have seen some people be like, this is now, like, this is just, Cosmere is like one big series now, and it's like, you have to read all of it. I find this extremely confusing. I feel this is, like, so this still is supposed to stay spoiler-free, which I don't think it said. It's kind of like spoiler-free light, where I'm assuming if you're watching a Wind and Truth review, like, you're aware of the basics of the Stormlight Archive. So I've said character names. Like, I've said there's Kaladin stuff in this book. So, like, Kaladin is alive at the beginning of Wind and Truth. I've also said I think that there's, like, Lift stuff and a few other characters. Okay, so that was fun. Background noise started happening, and I instinctively muted my microphone to try and sound, and then I was like, whatever, I'll just pause the recording and wait, and then re-record, and I forgot to unmute my microphone. So there is now about a 7-minute rant about the Cosmere stuff that is now never going to see the light of day, but we're going to potentially repeat it. We're going to see if the rant is shorter or longer than this time. Because where I was going with this is that, yes, you can read just the Stormlight Archive. After the rant, I consider it should just be its own video, maybe. But like, yes, if you want, you can read just the 5 novels of the Stormlight Archive, none of the novellas. You don't have to read Mistborn. You don't have to read Warbreaker. You don't have to read Elantris. You don't have to read Arcanum Unbounded or White Sand or Dragonsteel Prime or any of it, and you will be fine. Like, and if someone is asking you, like, do I have to read everything? The answer is no. They can just read these 5. And it is different. If someone is like, yeah, I want to read everything, you might as well tell them, like, okay, you should probably read Warbreaker before Words of Radiance. Because they're going to read Warbreaker anyways. But there's this thing now where it seems like whenever something Cosmere happens, people are reading it and they're like, oh, but if someone doesn't know what's going on in the background here, it's like they can't read this novel. And sometimes it's not even Cosmere things. Sometimes it's concepts that are completely understandable only in the scope of the series that you're reading that are just also touched upon other stuff. The biggest one is shards. When anything like shard stuff happens, people like freak out. Like, this happened in the Lost Metal, and it was like, this is stuff that's a continuation from Era 1. This isn't Cosmere. And I feel like that's the disconnect when people are like, you have to read all the Cosmere stuff to understand this. And I'm like, no, you don't. Like, the Cosmere stuff it's in Mistborn Era 1. And it's adequately explained. The Stormlight stuff is adequately explained in Stormlight. But also, like, yes, obviously there are things you will not get if you read the Stormlight Archive and you have not read other Cosmere stuff. But, like, there's also a bunch of stuff you're not going to get because that's how reading works. And it's a 2 million word series with a bazillion different characters and random ass interludes. There's stuff I'm like, the interludes where I'm just like, I forget what's going on here. Because, like, I'm not an encyclopedia. I am not the Coppermind. And I have read all of the Cosmere except White Sand. So, like, it's this worrying that people are going to, like, read the scene and without having all the available background knowledge, they're just going to be like, what language is this? Is this English? Like, the scenes still work. Like, ultimately, this is a book about the narrative journey of a group of characters. And every single one of those characters' narratives still function like 98% as well. Probably most of them just 100% as well. Like, Kaladin's story is the same. Okay? Like, no, someone is not going to be like, like, yeah, okay, there might be a scene with Zahil. And it's cool to know Zahil's background, because that makes it fun. But also someone could just read that and be like, whoa, this is a cool, mysterious dude who has a lot of cool scenes. And that's totally fine. Like, it's okay. Because you don't have to be worried about people not having the background knowledge for minor characters in random scenes and be like, as a result, you cannot read Wind and Truth. Like, it's all one big series. It's like, I don't get it at all. I think it's crazy. And this is, as I said in the rant I cut, this is a hill I'm dying on, but it's a hill I'm dying on because I think I'm just right. This is one I'm a lot of the time I'm pretty, like, non-confrontational. I'm like, it's a matter of opinion. Like, you do you. But I think I'm just right about this. Like, I will argue with anyone. Like, no, you don't have to read Mistborn Secret History before you read Wind and Truth. Like, a lot of people, like, they have this, like, yes, someone else's experience reading the book is going to be slightly different from yours if they have not read all the Cosmere. But their experience will be different than yours no matter what. And that's fine. Sometimes the experience might be better. Sometimes it might be worse. It's not going to be a huge, like, their experience will be better and worse for a whole list of other factors. And, like, whether they understand what a cognitive shadow is going to have a much smaller impact than all the other stuff that impacts how much people will enjoy a novel. So yeah, anyway, if you're out there, someone asks, hey, like, I'm just interested in Stormlight. What do I have to read to understand Stormlight? The answer is Stormlight. And, please don't tell people they have to read all the Cosmere, like it's one series, or that they're going to, like, read Wind and Truth and be confused. You know who's awesome at this? You know what fandom is awesome at this? The Malazan fandom. Because, like, there's like 25 Malazan books. There's so many. And you know what people say? Just read the main 10. you'll be okay. And you know what? I think it's because one thing they're better at is they don't have the expectation of understanding everything. So, like, they're like, yeah, you know, you're going to miss stuff, but you're going to miss stuff anyways. Now, are you probably going to miss more stuff on Malazan than you are on the Stormlight Archive? Yeah. But you know what? I just have to tell you, you are going to miss a lot in the Stormlight Archive the first time you read it, and the second time you read it, and the third time you read it, no matter what you do. So, and everyone is. So you don't have to stress that people are going to miss something, even if you think it's cool. They will find other cool things that you missed, and they'll be okay. Okay. It was 6 minutes, not time this time, not 7. So we cut that by 1 minute. Good work, everyone. Yeah, Wind and Truth. I'm actually really excited to reread this novel. I feel almost the first time there's almost an oversaturation of completely insanely good moments that, like, usually the Sanderlanche, it's got a ton of crazy stuff, but it's got like 1 or 2 central moments to really latch on to emotionally. And there are other novels that I've read where I feel like when you have these like oversaturations, they're actually like even more emotionally impactful the second time you read them. I think this is, we're going back to Malazan. This is probably one reason like people enjoy Malazan reread so much. I haven't reread Malazan yet, but I'm expecting this effect to happen where like novels that have such an oversaturation of craziness, a lot of the time, like when you're prepared for what the craziness is, and like each bit of craziness will hit harder the second time. This happened with Battleground as well, the Dresden novel. And like the most positive thing I can say about this is it just has like 3 or 4 times the amount of insanely good moments as the other Stormlight novels, which all already have a crazy amount of insanely good moments. Like, if the other Stormlight novels have like, you know, their Sanderlanche has like 2 or 3 defining moments, this feels like it has 20. Yeah. And that's I guess my slightly discombobulated, because I forget what I've already talked about because I talked for 7 minutes and then it wasn't recording audio. My slightly discombobulated review of Wind and Truth that has the longest list of cons of any of the 5 Stormlight novels, but also the longest list of pros. And I think Stormlight, like, I just think Stormlight is better than Sanderson's other stuff. Like, I think you can zoom in more. Like, whenever I read another, like, when I go back and I reread Era 2, I enjoy Era 2. I think it's quite obvious that the supporting cast are not as painted as precisely as the supporting cast for Stormlight. Where, like, Era 2, if you're like, let's try and zoom in on, like, this character and see what's going on with them, a lot of time you're like, oh, they're kind of just there. And Stormlight, that just kind of doesn't happen. Like, he just keeps zooming in more, and the resolution stays the same. And I think there's just a greater degree of detail in this series than a vast majority of other works. And it's one of the reasons I can reread the Words of Radiance like 8 times and still find it massively enjoyable and satisfying to read. And that is no less true about Wind and Truth. The flashbacks were so good. And the interludes were so good. I saw, like, yeah, there are a lot of interludes in this book. One, the interludes are pretty short, but also, so I'm just going to say I love the Way of Kings interludes, but the Way of Kings interludes are, like, random. Like, they're usually disconnected from the narrative. These interludes, like, most of them are story relevant. So, like, they've kind of slowly become more story relevant. I'm kind of actually wondering if Stormlight 6 we're going to go to, like, the random ones, because I kind of like the random ones. But it is also, like, these interludes were gas. And I was pretty excited when I saw we got more interludes, because they're always really good. I am going to have a spoiler discussion with Kyle, Bookborn, Lost in Discovery, who's Christian, and John from Talking Story. I believe that's going to be on January 4th, one of those days. Yeah, on January 4th. Because obviously there's a lot of like crazy stuff I can't talk about because it's super spoilery. And there's also some of the criticism stuff that I can't talk about because it's spoilery. So if you want to hear spoiler thoughts, I will be going through it there. Journey Before Destination, everyone. Let me know. someone asks you, hey, I'm really interested in like the Stormlight Archive, but that's really the stuff I'm interested in. What books do I have to read to get the Stormlight Archive? What do you tell those people? And please just tell me that you tell them you can read the 5 Stormlight novels. Because you can, man. You can. Like, I promise. They're gonna be okay. Kyle skipped 7 Wheel of Time novels and was fine. Like, I know a person who the first Realm of the Elderlings book they've read was like Fool's Assassin. And like, these things are crazy to do. But like, they were fine. If someone can do those things, like, someone out there in the world is going to read Wind and Truth as their first Sanderson novel. Like, they're just going to see it in the bookstore and they're going to be like, oh, that's a cool cover. This is a thick book. I wonder what it's about. I'm going to give it a try. And don't do that. Like, that's a horrible idea. To it, like, the degree of difference between that and skipping college, like, they're incomparable. But also, like, they might enjoy the book. Anyway, what'd you think of Wind and Truth? Have a good day, everyone. Just for fun, for the people who made it this far, here's the rant where the audio didn't record, but you can see me getting more and more animated. You should have seen Kyle's impression of me at Dragonsteel. The hands waving around. I was like, it was accurate. Anyway, here's me doing that and getting more and more animated and angry at the air at 16 times speed.